Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Write to Publish with me, Karen Stanley. It feels like ages since we last spoke. Maybe it doesn't feel like ages for you, but I've had a holiday in between, so it's good to be back in the driving seat talking about all things writing and publishing again with you. Now today we're going to talk about adding sparkle to your writing. It's not a terribly technical term, but I think it really does encapsulate what we're going to talk about today. We've all read writing that leaves us feeling a little bit cold, haven't we? A little bit flat, ends up in our did not finish pile, doesn't really engage us, doesn't really float our boats, as it were. And quite often, it's not necessarily the story itself, but it's the way that story is delivered. I know when I was at university, I've listened to some brilliant lecturers who really knew their stuff, but their delivery left a little bit to be desired. And because of that, then we as students, or because we were a little bit rebellious as well, kind of tuned out. We were turned off to their messaging simply because of the delivery. And your writing is exactly the same. You can have the best story in the world. You can have the best idea, the most interesting plot, the most exciting kind of notion for how your story is going to take place, but if you don't deliver it well, it's going to fall flatter than a very, very flat pancake. So we're going to talk about adding sparkle to your writing and the sort of sparkle that makes your sentences sing, that makes your reader go, oh my God, I need to read on, get really engrossed. They've forgotten their glass of wine or their cup of tea on the side, and they're just completely engrossed and engaged in your book. That's really the dream, isn't it? To write something that makes someone feel like they can't put your book down. That is really the dream. So if you've ever looked at your writing and you've read it back to yourself, which you should have done, as I've always advising you to do, particularly if you're at the editing phase or the revising phase, and you thought, it's all right, but it's not really lighting my fire, this is the episode for you, and we're going to talk about what sparkle is and why it matters. So, as I said before, good writing, it isn't just about getting your ideas down, it's about how you make your reader feel when they read them. Yeah, so we can impart information in a million different ways. Some will be thoroughly engaging, some will be a little bit dull and lackluster. So that's the difference, really. So it's kind of like the spice, the seasoning on your writing. It's the rhythm, the unexpected twist, or a phrase that makes your reader go, oh, I've never quite heard it like that before, or that's intriguing. It is show and tell, but not only show and tell. So it might be, I saw a cat gets turned into, a dark flash of mischief, slinked past the dustbins with twitching whiskers and a flick of a tail. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's elevating that prose really to something that we didn't quite expect. And your readers will still see the cat, as in inverted commas, but they'll see it with more vision. They'll see it with more imagery. They'll see it with more pizzazz. They'll become completely engrossed. And as I've sort of said before, your brain sort of struggles really to differentiate between something that's happening in real life and something that it's reading about, which is great for us writers. If you create the right imagery, if you have the right description, your reader will very much be immersed into that world almost as if they were there. So the sparkle is really what keeps your reader curious, and it's that curiosity which is going to sell your book, which is going to build your characters, and it's going to make your story stick in people's minds long after they've closed the book. That you want that book to resonate, you want that book to be with them for ages. How often have you watched a film read a book, seen a play, and it's really impacted on you. And for ages after, I don't know if that's me just being weird, but sometimes I get so engaged in the characters that they feel real to me, and I imagine what they're doing now, even though in my head I know they're fictional. So we've talked about, adding that kind of powerful imagery, using the show don't tell, using that inference. We've talked about that a lot in past episodes. So now let's talk about rhythm and tone. Every sentence has a beat. Yeah. So some are short, punchy, like this. Those are short, punchy sentences. Others take their time, rolling over syllables, carrying your reader along like a boat on a lazy river. So varying your rhythm is going to keep your reader's brain awake. So too many short sentences and it will start to sound robotic. Too many long, drawn-out, wafty, flowery ones, and they'll feel like they're drowning in commas and explanations and adjectives. So you want a mix. You want that kind of sentence music, really. And there is a wonderful passage about 5-word sentences by someone called Gary Provost. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right. And if you're a member of my writing community, I have posted that before, and it will be in the resources section of the membership vault. But it's a beautifully written piece that demonstrates the difference between using just 5-word sentences where it becomes very, this is the window, this is the door, this is the man that walked through the door, this is the boy who sat on the chair. It's that kind of, it becomes almost hypnotic, but not in a good way, in a kind of a dull and boring way. So by varying your sentence length, that's really going to raise your writing game and have your reader engaged and interested because they're not quite sure what's coming next, okay? And a bit like music, really, the pauses sometimes are as important as the beats, as the notes, aren't they? So by varying your sentence length, you're creating that rhythm. You're creating that almost that lyrical kind of dance. And then we think about tone. So tone is sort of a bit like the outfit you're wearing. So is your writing quite formal, quite, what's the word? Safe, I would say, is it kind of that kind of thing? Or is your writing sort of chatty, cheeky, bit dark and moody? You really need to understand your tone, and you do need to be consistent unless you're deciding to break rules on purpose, which is always okay, providing you get it right. It can be risky if you don't get it right. So, for example, if you're writing a memoir, let's say, your tone might be warm, reflective, deeply personal, because it's going to be a personal story. Whereas, conversely, if it's a business book, then you might want to be confident, authoritative, but not robotic. You still want to be authentic. You can be human and sparkle even when you're talking about business or even financial. I wonder if finance books might be harder to do, but serious subjects you can still write in a way that is engaging. It doesn't have to be boring. And then moving on from that, really, we're going to talk about sort of the sentence length and variation in a bit more detail. So this is the real hero of engaging prose. And as I've said before, you need to mix it up. That's the whole trick. So as I've said before, short sentences give impact. They land like a punch or a revelation. They create breath. So that's going back to our music, isn't it? It's that pauses, that kind of staccato rhythm. That's going to really, add impact and sort of power and surprise almost, really. Whereas longer sentences allow space for nuance, layering thoughts, adding texture, and letting your reader float for a while in the world you're creating. But don't let them run on forever, or they'll start to feel like they're in a bit of a hostage situation. So, and they're drowning in your prose. So just make sure that you're really engaging them by varying that sentence length. So you want ebb and flow. Just like the music, you want fast, slow, soft, loud. Prose is no different, really. And then let's move on to word choice. Now, this is where your sparkle is really going to sparkle. And this really very much goes back to the show don't tell technique. So anyone can say he walked into the room, but what if he lurched or drifted or swaggered or stomped or tiptoed? Now we're getting imagery. Yes, we know he's come into the room. That's a kind of a given. But how did he do it? Because then that will lead our brain to start asking questions. Well, why? Why did he tiptoe in? Why did he creep in? Why did he stamp in? Is he angry? We're starting to make those questions and those links. And suddenly when we do that, we know more than just his physical location. He's gone from here to there. He's gone from outside the room to inside the room. But we're going to know a bit about his state of mind, his mood, maybe a little bit about his past. The power of those precise, unexpected word choices is what's really going to bring your prose to life. Avoid the obvious, but don't go too mad. We don't want you to sound like you've swallowed a thesaurus. We don't want, perambulated into the room. It might technically be walked, but unless you're reading sort of, I don't know, historical satire or something like that, we don't want to over-egg the pudding. So too flowery word choices where someone's got to reach for a thesaurus or a dictionary to decipher it, your reader's just going to get bored and not bother to read on. But make sure that the words that you use, they want to be specific, they want to be concrete, not too abstract, but a little bit surprising, just to make your reader's brain go, oh, okay, that's made me ask a question. I'm going to sit up and listen now because I don't quite know what's going on, or it's made me question that a little bit more. And it just is going to jolt your reader's brain just a tiny bit. So, I don't know, instead of the sun was hot, the sun pressed down with a burning intensity, that made me feel as though I was suffocating. It's not a brilliant example off the top of my head, but you get the idea. So you start to feel the weight of the sun, you feel the heat of the sun, you feel the emotions of the person who feels like they're being kind of burnt by the sun. Yeah. So it will give us a feeling, not just what the sun's doing. And so now let's sort of talk a bit further about imagery. We don't want you to describe every leaf in the forest, for example. We don't want what they call purple prose, but we want purposeful prose. Yes, so imagery that evokes mood, setting, emotion, that draws a picture. And that picture needs to be vivid so that the reader feels that they've actually been dropped into your scene physically. So talking, as we were before, about your brain not really understanding the difference between the written word and physically being there. So the better that imagery, the more your reader is going to feel like they've been transported to that world. But don't overdo it, because if then I've had discussions like this with many of my writers before, which is like, you don't need to describe every little thing or every little detail. Make sure that the details you are describing do something to drive the story forward, that they are purposeful, they have some bearing in the story. We don't need to know that the protagonist was wearing red socks if it's completely irrelevant. Yeah. So that's kind of a bit of a guide for that. And so some quick sort of sparkly tools, not sparkly themselves, but to add sparkle, metaphors and similes. I don't know, she was as graceful as a giraffe wearing roller skates. Instantly you get that kind of humorous link. We're not saying exactly what we mean, but we've got that inferred meaning. And also think about sensory details. So, don't just describe what things look like. Again, harping back to show, don't tell. I know it's an overused term, but it's really powerful. Bring in smell, sound, texture, taste, all of those feelings that help you to really experience as a person when you go somewhere. You don't just see it. You might feel the wind on your cheeks. You might feel the sun on your skin. You might feel the crunch of leaves beneath your feet. You might smell the smell of wood smoke, on a bonfire autumn day. So think about using all of your senses, and that will create much more powerful imagery. And And something like sometimes a bit of personification can be quite good. So I don't know, think about, the wind didn't just blow, it howled like it had something to say. We know that the wind can't physically speak, but actually by that personification really creates powerful imagery and does add sparkle to your writing. And then, contrast is always good for sparkle. So a moment of beauty in a really gritty or sinister setting will create tension and interest, for example. So contrast is good. And, after all that we've said, do remember less is more. Yeah. So a well-placed image is worth sort of 10 quite lazy descriptions. We don't want to overdo it. We don't want sprinkles on sprinkles on sprinkles on our cake. We want what's relevant, what's purposeful, and what's going to give us the most impact. So you want the reader to see it, to feel it, to imagine they're being there. What they don't want to feel is like you're ramming adjectives down their throat on a large spoon. So think about a little bit of restraint at times, but what's it adding to your text? So let's sum up our sparkly edition of Write to Publish. So vary your rhythm and sentence length. So musical, lyrical. Think about that lyrical kind of nature of your writing. Now your tone. So you're wearing the right outfit for your occasion effectively. So does this suit the genre that you're writing? If you're writing a gritty horror, you're not likely to be using fluffy romantic adjectives, are you? You're going to use more kind of shocking, gory descriptions. Yeah. Use precise but unexpected words, although not ridiculous. Yeah. We don't want someone to imagine that you've eaten a thesaurus for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And create imagery that paints emotion, not just scenery. So again, going back to our show Don't Tell, think about what is the reader going to feel when they read your writing. I've said this 100 times before, and I will say it again. If your reader doesn't feel anything when they read your writing, that's not good. They need to feel something, whether it's horror or shock or surprise or anger or happiness or joy or sadness. They need to feel something. And most importantly, in this world of AI that we live in, I think the more we get into AI, the more people will crave that human voice. That's just my 2 pence. So let your voice shine through. And, no one else is going to write like you. And that is the real magic of writing. There's no such thing really as a new story anymore. I'm pretty sure all the stories have been done, so to speak, but no one's going to write it like you. So finding your tone, finding your voice, finding your unique style, whether it's gory, gritty, humorous, friendly, exciting, tense, whatever your kind of writing style is, that's going to be your real sparkle. So I hope that's been helpful to you, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope it's going to give you some tips. If you haven't joined the Mabel and Stanley writing and publishing community yet, then what are you waiting for? It's just £9 a month, and you join a lovely private Facebook group where we're just about to organise a meetup with all of our members just on Zoom to talk about all things writing. We share each other's writing, we give feedback, I post sort of tips and bits and bobs in there on a weekly basis. And also, once you're a member of the community, you also get access to the membership vault, which is full of writing resources. In fact, I think there is even a resource entitled Adding Sparkle to Your Writing, which takes some of these points that I've talked about today in lovely video format and gives you a little task for you to try. And there's a lot of really cool resources on that site for you to use at your leisure. So if you are interested in becoming a member of the Mabel and Stanley Writing and Publishing community, then just drop me an email, Karen@mabelandstanleypublishing.com, and maybe put a membership in your subject line, and I'll be sure to get in touch and I will send you details of how you might be able to join that. And I can also, when I figured out the tech, maybe put the link to join in the comments section under this podcast episode as well. If you like what I've got to say, please do share, like, comment, subscribe. It's really helpful to grow the podcast and to grow our audience. And coming up in the next few weeks, I'm recording a whole stack of wonderful reader interviews next week, actually, on Monday and Tuesday. I've got several back-to-back interviews with new and established authors talking about their writing journey, their experiences, the challenges that they face, the successes that they've had. And I think as writers, it's always wonderful to hear from fellow writers in our field, to hear from our peers, because it's where we learn the most, where we get to share, and where our writing journey doesn't feel quite so lonely. So look out for those in the podcast episodes coming up. There's a whole host of wonderful writer interview episodes coming up that I know you will enjoy. So thank you again for listening. I'm Karen Stanley. Don't forget Karen at mabelandstanleypublishing.com. If you have any questions or you'd like to join the group, please do get in touch. I absolutely love to hear from all of you beautiful people. Thank you for listening. Take care, and I'll speak to you all again soon.